All right, it is Thursday, September 10th, 2020, and this is the Fight Business Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Auger, and today we're going to cover a wide range of topics, including the disaster that DAZN is going through with the Canelo Alvarez lawsuit, Bellator and PFL making some broadcast moves into international markets and why they're deciding to do that right now. Dustin Poirier versus Tony Ferguson looks like it's not going to happen for UFC 254 due to contract negotiations. We'll touch on that a little bit and more. So if you're watching on YouTube, again, hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to the podcast via Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, I really appreciate it. And don't forget to also go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. We're really working on some awesome content here. We've got some new team members that I'm really excited about. We're about to start churning out some really good stuff here. And the more subscribers we get, the more leeway and bandwidth we have to do that stuff. So much appreciated. Really do appreciate your support for this. And let's go ahead and dive in. So first up, let's go ahead and talk about DAZN. So one of the biggest pieces of news coming out of the combat sports world this week is that Canelo Alvarez is filing a lawsuit against DAZN and Golden Boy Promotions. He's alleging breach of contract. And to give you a high-level overview of the situation, if you want more details, go follow Jason Cruz on Twitter. The dude knows his stuff, wrote a whole book about legal issues in combat sports, MMA specifically. He's one of the most knowledgeable sources out there about this stuff. So check him out for the actual details. But a high-level overview of the situation is this. Essentially, Canelo's contract with DAZN, he gets certain purse structures based on the quality of opponent. So at the premium tier, which is judged at pretty much the sole discretion of DAZN, they decide who is a premium opponent or not. He gets $35 million per his boxing purse, which is when you heard about him signing with DAZN, that was the whole $365 million for so many fights. And it was such a major deal. That was all based on premium opponents. For anything less than that, and really not actually less than that, in most cases, it's up to DAZN, who is premium, who's not. If it's not a premium opponent, he gets a significantly smaller purse. And right now, Callum Smith or Billy Joel Saunders is waiting in the wings to fight Canelo. He's very much about those fights, but DAZN doesn't consider those guys premium tier opponents. So where that rubs Canelo the wrong way is that they're pretty much next in line to fight Canelo and get a shot at his titles. It's hard to argue that there's someone in the boxing world that's more of a premium tier. Triple G is listed as a premium tier, and a lot of people want to see that third fight, but there's been some roadblocks in terms of getting that deal done with the purse cut and also just the cross-promotional, everything going on there. Don't know the specifics. Again, you'd have to do some more research to see why that fight fell out, but it did, right? We had talked about it last year at some point, and that trilogy just never came to fruition. So besides Triple G, those two are really, who's left for Canelo right now in the boxing world. And DAZN saying, sorry, that's not a premium opponent. Who is a premium opponent, you ask? Well, according to DAZN, premium opponents are listed as follows. Outside of Triple G, there is Oscar De La Hoya, who is 47 and has just recently come out of retirement. That's a whole, if you can't understand the absurdity of calling him a premium opponent, I don't know what to tell you. Then there's Jorge Masvidal or Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now, what do those three have in common? Realistically, all three of them probably get destroyed by Canelo easily. I mean, Jorge probably has the best shot in the boxing ring with Canelo, but even then, in a pure boxing fight, I'm pretty sure Canelo would take that hands down. But what they also have is big drawing power, right? We've recently seen with the Kamaru Usman fight that Masvidal has kind of seemingly broached that next level of superstardom. They were able to get 1.3 million pay-per-view buys worldwide, around 900,000 or so domestically. That's a big needle moving pay-per-view. And it wasn't Usman by all accounts. Definitely social media metrics and other metrics we follow really show that it was Masvidal reaching that next level, finally, moving up after defeating Nate Diaz and getting that BMF belt, really catapulted him to a whole new realm of crossover stardom. So he's definitely got the needle power. Khabib Nurmagomedov certainly has the needle power in terms of just his devout following in MMA. He's really started to break some boundaries internationally, especially after the Poirier fight at UFC 242. I mean, he's really become kind of a superstar in the Muslim community. It's not surprising that he is finally taken that realm or taking that position rather as being a massive star in that community. And if he went up against Canelo, that would be a huge crossover fight. You've got the undefeated MMA star who's known for his wrestling going in and trying to box. It's not going to be on the level of Mayweather McGregor, but it would certainly draw. It certainly would. And then Oscar De La Hoya, same thing. He's 47. I just talked about how it would be absurd in terms of, I think that's the weakest opponent for Canelo, honestly, from pure skill. Because even though Khabib certainly would need to, touch up his boxing and do all that, he's far younger, far fresher. He seemingly has a good chin on him. I feel like De La Hoya, at 47 is just asking for a brutal beatdown. Maybe not. Maybe he would be ahead of Khabib there. I might get reamed in the comments for this take, but I wouldn't put them that far apart either way. That much I would say. But again, everybody knows Oscar De La Hoya. Even, my friends who never followed boxing know Oscar De La Hoya is a boxer that has a name value and star power, and would maybe, especially during a pandemic, if they don't have anything else going on, might go ahead and, tune in to see Canelo versus De La Hoya. Plus, you've got a whole storyline that if you did De La Hoya versus Alvarez, obviously Golden Boy Promotions is run by Oscar De La Hoya. So you'd have this kind of like WWE-esque, former, stablemate fighting the boss type situations. So that whole storyline would definitely be, something that the media could play up, and I'm sure they would if that fight came to fruition. The point, though, of all of this, in a broader picture, and what I really want to focus on here, is that DAZN's in big trouble. I've talked to you guys before about how DAZN was looking to raise money before the pandemic. Len Blatnovic, the billionaire who really pretty much was DAZN's entire payroll for the first several years, has already decided before all of this craziness with COVID happened that he was ready to, kind of look for the door and exit, or at least, step back from the role he was playing as the major funder of the streaming service. And ever since COVID-19 happened, things have only gotten worse for DAZN. I mean, they now are looking to raise twice as much as they were before the pandemic hit. They are telling subscribers, hey, you can't get a refund. We're just going to delay your payments and then give you credits for the next X amount of months. They're pretty much locking people in to not allow them to cancel their service, which is huge. It's really a bad time for the promotion. And this is possibly the death knell. If Alvarez is able to either get out of his contract or, win in a court of law in terms of saying, hey, they breached contract, so I'm owed damages, I'm free to go wherever, that's pretty much it. I can't imagine DAZN is going to be able to hang on long enough to get the subscriber base and foothold they need in order to convince investors to pour more money into them, while they, again, go after their main goal, which is getting NFL rights, MLB rights, the major American sports, so to speak, broadcast media rights, which come up for renegotiation here in a couple of years. That's really what they're looking to do. Is they are trying to hold on until those media rights deals are up for bid, so that they can get some major players. Because if they get American football, or they get most MLB games or basketball, that would take them to a whole new level. And that's really what they sold Blatnovic on, was, hey, we are basically fund us, and then we'll eventually become this streaming giant that will rival ESPN, will rival some of these other big streaming networks, and will lead your way into the future. That's what they sold him on. And quite frankly, the financials, even with Alvarez and some of these bigger stars, Anthony Joshua, getting Bellator and some of these other MMA promotions to kind of round out their combat sports portfolio and use that as their entry into the rest of the sports markets, has metrics on that are not good. That they simply are just not what they expected internally and what they were promising their investors. So, is this the death knell for DAZN? Very well could be. I mean, it's hard to see where they go from here. If they're able to negotiate a premium opponent and actually get the subscribers that come along with that, because that's really, again, what DAZN is looking for. They're looking for somebody who moves the needle, who's going to get people to sign up for the service, who they can maybe, sell on a one-off pay-per-view style event. I don't know if they're going to go that route, but who knows, especially right now, they're hurting for cash. They'll be looking for every penny they can get. And Callum Smith and Billy Joe Saunders are not going to do that. Will hardcore boxing fans tune in? Sure. Even moderate boxing fans will probably tune in for those fights because it's an Alvarez fight and you never know. But you're not going to really boost your subscriber count or get more viewers than normal if you have those fights. So DAZN's definitely up against the ropes here. If I had to call it, I would say that, I would say this is the beginning of the end for them. Could be wrong. They do have some good leadership there. But at the same time, they just haven't gotten the traction that they needed to in order to set up their bigger play at some of these bigger sports media rights deals. And without that foothold, you can't convince investors to keep you alive long enough or to invest and give you the war chest you need in order to go after and outbid some of the television networks who are also on the ropes ever since the rise of streaming, right? Fox and some of these bigger broadcast networks are hurting for content and bleeding subscribers. ESPN is making that transition to ESPN Plus, but they still have the majority of their revenue and their ad revenue coming from their flagship television channel. And they need as much content as they can get. They're not just going to give those rights up and say, okay, you outbid us. If you're DAZN and you're hoping to win some of that stuff, you have to go big and you have to have a war chest or some financial backing in order to get this done. And right now they don't appear to have that. So I think this might be it for them. We'll see, but this might be the slow beginning of the death spiral for DAZN. All right, next up, let's go ahead and dive into some somber news, unfortunately, for most of us fight fans. Looks like Dustin Poirier is not going to be fighting Tony Ferguson as originally thought at UFC 254 in October due to contract issues. Poirier has said from the start that he's a prize fighter, and if the prize is right, he'll go out there and fight Tony easily. Apparently, he's telling ESPN in a new report that just came out today that they couldn't come to terms, that Poirier and UFC couldn't come to terms with that. Now, if you look at Poirier's purse history, he got $150K to show and win against Dan Hooker, his most recent fight that he headlined in an all-out war that was, will go down as a classic fight. I mean, that was an amazing fight. And if you look at Poirier's past several fights, I mean, the dude rarely has a bad fight. I would say Nurmagomedov is his worst showing out of his last 4 or 5 fights. And that's not taking anything away against Dustin Poirier because it's Khabib Nurmagomedov and that's what he does. I mean, he just goes out there and mauls you. It's he can make the most exciting fighters look bad. And in fact, we may see that happen in the upcoming title fight at UFC 254 when Nurmagomedov fights Justin Gaethje. It might be, Gaethje just looks helpless out there. It's what, Khabib does. But, that aside, Poirier has put on some of the best fights, most entertaining fights that one can imagine a fighter has, put on. In recent memory, the only person I can really compare him to is Gaethje, actually, in terms of just the all-out excitement of the rest of his fights. I mean, his fight against Dan Hooker, his fight against Gaethje, his fight against Max Holloway, his fight against Eddie Alvarez the second time, first time as well, though that ended in controversy. But second time against Alvarez, looking amazing. Anthony Pettis, the dude puts on fight of the night performance makers consistently. And he's saying, I need to get paid my worth in order to go and take a dangerous fight against Tony Ferguson, which is completely understandable because Ferguson is a monster. Up until losing to Gaethje recently, he had been on a crazy, win streak and had really bloodied some guys up. And even Gaethje took damage in that fight. I mean, it's not like Gaethje came out unscathed. It was a good back and forth. That's a rough fight for anybody to take. And Poirier is basically saying, you know what, I'll do it, but you gotta pay me my worth. And the hard part for him is that, this is just a promotional stance. This is what they do. This is what they do with John Jones. This is what they did with Jorge Masvidal. And they apparently came to some terms, right? Eventually got Masvidal back in the octagon. But before he got that title shot, when issues happened and, when Burns got removed because of COVID, I mean, Masvidal was complaining, saying the same type of thing. Like, hey, you got to pay me what I'm worth. And Poirier is not, I don't want to say he's not in title contention, because if he got a title shot again, in 6 months, or if he was a late notice replacement, if a fight fell out, I mean, nobody would be shocked that Poirier would get another crack at the belt, right? I mean, he's looked pretty phenomenal outside of anyone not named Khabib Nurmagomedov. So he's not out of the title picture, but realistically, he probably needs at least one more win to get another crack at the belt through merit. And Ferguson would certainly, bump him up probably to near top of the line there in terms of getting another crack against Khabib. But it's, there's no incentive on the UFC side to say, oh, yeah, we're going to give you more money for a Ferguson fight, when historically Poirier hasn't drawn or been a huge needle mover, right? He is beloved by hardcore fans, rightfully so. He puts on amazing, exciting fights, but it's similar to Gaethje. I mean, Gaethje's best pay-per-view or pay-per-view and or just viewing audience in general came against Tony Ferguson when it was the first event back in the middle of a pandemic. There were not a lot of sports on. There's definitely a COVID boost there. There's a COVID boost because sports had been shut down for a while. Nothing had been on. And all of a sudden you have a pretty stacked card in UFC 249, and pay-per-view numbers for that, I believe, we're trending in the 800,000 range or so, which is massive for both Gaethje and Ferguson. Because historically, Gaethje and Ferguson both didn't really bring in viewers. I mean, Ferguson brought in around 200,000 when he fought Kevin Lee, which is the only other time he main evented a pay-per-view. And Gaethje hadn't main evented a pay-per-view, but had main evented some ESPN cards, and the viewership was not, the highest ESPN had ever seen. It's, kind of middling or lower, on the lower end. So, and just look again at Masvidal in terms of, he's selling 1.3 million worldwide. That's still a good 500,000 more than Gaethje versus Ferguson apparently sold. So Gaethje is not this huge needle mover, despite being one of the most entertaining fighters to watch. And that is something the hardcore fans sometimes really forget, is that, you can go out there and be a killer. You can go out there and look phenomenal. Right, Israel Adesanya up until the OL Rim Arrow fight, which, yes, we won't go down there. Everybody gets one, but up until then had looked like a killer. Right, had just been gone out there, just made everybody look kind of foolish. Had that fight with Anderson Silva, just dominated Robert Whittaker, but he wasn't really moving the needle in a outside of UFC hardcore fan way. Right, everyone was so hyped on him. Everyone's like, he's amazing, undefeated. And he still has that hype, but he's also not bringing in 500, 600, 700,000 pay-per-views. Whittaker versus Adesanya did not, hit those numbers. They simply didn't. And he's not, some huge crossover star. Is he big in New Zealand and Oceania and Australia? Yeah, of course. Of course. He's growing there, just like Robert Whittaker was big there. I mean, Adesanya is obviously more popular, I would say, in that region, but at least at the moment. But I mean, it's not to the same level that, say, a Masvidal or a John Jones or a McGregor, obviously, is at, or Khabib even, right? It's just not that same transcendence. So yes, Poirier is a super exciting fighter. He's put on amazing fights, but to the promotion, he's not bringing in an extra 300,000-400,000 pay-per-view buys. He's not. And if you're not doing that, the promotion just isn't going to give you the pay that you probably want, regardless of how good you look, right? I mean, it is what it is. It's crappy for the fighters for sure, but that's how the promotion has always worked. And Poirier is one of the most, in terms of getting 150K, that is not bad at all. It's good stuff. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve more from a fighter, MRP standpoint. You can check my record on that. Fighters definitely deserve a bigger share, and Poirier definitely has every right in the world to go out there and say, I deserve more money. But he doesn't have the leverage, is what it comes down to. He simply doesn't. It's he's not bringing in all these extra pay-per-view buys. He's not getting that cross promotion from the media where, Sports Center's having him on to talk about, his next fight. And, yes, he does the charity work, which I respect and I think is awesome, but it's not like that charity work is getting picked up by mainstream news outlets, even though it probably should. He just doesn't have the leverage where the UFC is going to say, all right, we'll kick you an extra 200 grand for this fight. Or all right, we'll bump you up. We'll renegotiate your contract. Let's go ahead and talk about that. He doesn't have that leverage. It's rare that a fighter gets the opportunity to have some sort of leverage to hold over the UFC to renegotiate. Again, with Masvidal even, who was definitely more of a crossover star, it took Burns falling out of a fight and them needing a last-minute replacement for him to finally get the deal done. So even then, that's probably what it's going to take for Poirier, is he's probably going to have to be waiting in the wings. And if Gaethje pulls out or Khabib pulls out and they need an interim fight, especially since he has a win over Gaethje, then they might ring up Poirier and say, hey, Khabib's out, he's injured. You want to fight for another interim belt? And they might be willing to give him some more money, especially if it's a week or two out. But other than that, fortunately, this cycle of fighters saying they need more money, which is good that they are recognizing their worth finally, and that they're standing up to the promotion and saying, hey, no, I need more. That it's good that they're aware of that now, rather than, blinders on saying, yeah, the promotion's amazing, paying me everything I'm worth. And it's kind of like, well, the numbers don't necessarily support that. It still unfortunately leaves them with no real leverage in these scenarios. And Poirier is not going to get what he wants. He might sit on the shelf for a while. He might hang back, wait for an opportunity to jump in at a last minute cancellation. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's on the shelf for a while at this point, simply because if he's asking for more money, he's got nothing in terms of negotiational leverage to go against the UFC. So sorry, guys. It sucks. I want to see that fight too, but I don't think it's going to get done for 254 or in the near future for that matter. All right, shifting gears. Now, let's go ahead and talk about Bellator's big announcement that is scheduled to happen tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Zoom. Scott Coker said, hey, we're having a major announcement. There's a lot of speculation here. Is it Brock Lesnar being signed, which would be, bonkers? Is it, some huge fight announcement or an announcement of a tournament? I've seen some of that going on. A lot of speculation as to what it could be. I hate to disappoint, and I don't know that this is it for sure. I kind of hope I'm wrong, because it would be nice to be wrong in the scenario. But I'm pretty sure what we're looking at is Bellator announcing that they're moving to CBS Sports or CBS Sports Net, or maybe even Showtime, something of that form or fashion. Recently, Bellator had its last event on the Paramount Network. It's hard to believe that what was Spike TV and then became Paramount Network, the home of MMA for the longest time. UFC was on there, then Bellator, it's been the home of MMA, or showing at least some type of MMA for, I think, 13, 14 years, going on 14 years at this point, is not going to have any MMA shows, as far as I know. It looks like that's, it's done. They're moving Bellator off of the network. They had a good run, kind of. I mean, the past couple of years, obviously, ratings haven't been great. Let's just be honest. We're talking in the 300,000, 200,000 viewers. I think they posted their highest ratings since the Fedor Emelianenko versus Ryan Bader fight recently here, when their first event back, and even that was still in the 400,000 range. They're not killing it, right? ESPN UFC cards were in the millions. Now they're obviously, with some of the ESPN headliners, it's not hitting the millions, so to speak. But I mean, they are, Bellator and Paramount haven't exactly been, ratings blockbusters. It's sad, but that's just how it is. So they've moved off of Paramount. They don't have an official home. You have DAZN, but that's winding down as well. I'm pretty sure at this point, what they're going to do is announce, hey, we're moving to CBS Sports, we're moving to Showtime, and it's going to be a new package. They're going to try and, say, hey, we've got some amazing things we can do now crossover wise, because you have Viacom and CBS merging recently here in the past year or so. That does open doors for some Showtime Bellator fights, maybe some cross promotion, right? You'd had MVP do some boxing. Scott Coker has been very open about letting fighters compete in other promotions and other sports, whether that's boxing, whether that's doing the Rising crossover that was a big hit. He is all about those cross promotional fights. And I would not be shocked if it's, hey, we're doing CBS Sports most times. We're also going to be doing some crossovers with Showtime Boxing and getting some lower level boxers that maybe don't have a big name for themselves, fighting MVP or fighting some of these Bellator athletes who want to box. Can totally see that happening. But I don't think we're going to get some announcement tomorrow that's Brock Lesnar is signed and we're doing Lesnar versus Fedor. Could that happen? Technically, but that would be a real shocker in my book. I don't know where they would have gotten the money to get Lesnar on board with that. And if they are putting the money towards Lesnar, don't think they're going to get their return on investment there. I really doubt it. And I also don't think it's going to be another tournament or, a huge, crazy super fight that nobody saw coming. There's a time and place for that. And right now, especially with the pandemic, even though they have the fight sphere and they're trying to protect athletes, we've seen in the UFC and other promotions, bare knuckle, how COVID's been affecting things. I don't think you want to try and run a tournament right now. I think it's a bad idea. So with that all in mind, or at least another tournament, I don't see it happening. With that all in mind, I think it's probably just, it's going to be their new home, which I would guess is CBS Sports Net, I believe is the name of the channel. I don't think it'll be CBS proper, although they probably will, just like the UFC does with ESPN Plus and ESPN. They'll have some shows on CBS proper, or on Showtime. And I do think there will be, even if they don't announce a Showtime card, I do think they will announce, like, we're going to do cross promotion here. We're going to have, MVP box somebody, or another, Cyborg box somebody. Could totally see that. Even if it's not a formal fight announcement, they just really hint or outright say they're going to do that somewhere down the line. Fully expect that. But I really think that announcement's probably just going to be their new, broadcast outlet. Sorry, guys. I hope I'm wrong, but I'd bet good money that it's just going to be, hey, we're on CBS now, which is still good. I think it's a good thing for Bellator. I think it gives them some more exposure. We'll see what their ratings are like when they make that move. We'll see if they go to Showtime, what those events are looking like. I'm sure insiders will be able to give some numbers. There will be reports about ratings or viewership, whether it's leaked or official. I'm sure there will be discussion around it wherever Bellator ends up. But nothing too crazy. Sorry, guys. Don't see it happening. All right. Speaking of Bellator, they also signed a deal with Oko Sports, which is a media company owned by subsidiary of Rambler Media Corporation, to now be their official broadcast partner in Russia. Conversely, PFL has been making some moves in the international distribution market. They recently made a deal with India Sport in terms of getting some broadcast out in the Indian region, and they've talked about bringing in some fighters from India for their next season. So, and I'm sorry, Eurosport India, not India Sport, Eurosport India for the PFL. So, two pretty big moves there for both Bellator and PFL. What's the play here, right? Why do these distribution deals now in the middle of a pandemic? One might think, well, is that the best time to be signing and inking a new deal here? Well, for Bellator and the PFL, yes, 100%. Again, most of these media companies are starved for content right now. Things are going back to normal in a sense. Tonight is technically the first night of American football being back. You have the MLB's been back on a reduced schedule. You have the NBA in the bubble. Things are kind of getting back to normal. Soccer's still going strong in terms of their bubble, no fans type games, but it still is at a slower pace, obviously, than before the pandemic happened. And these broadcast companies need content. Now, that's not to say that Bellator is going to be, churning out card after card after card, and Oko Sports is only going to show Bellator. But especially because Bellator has proven with their Fight Sphere that, we're going to come back, we're going to do events similar to the UFC, and MMA is one of the few sports that can kind of return to normal. We'll talk about the derailments we've seen in the UFC recently here in a second, but this is getting back into more of a normal rhythm than pretty much any other sport. You could still have full events. You can still generally have the cards stay intact when COVID doesn't strike. And even if it does, it's not that the whole thing gets scrapped. Whereas if, an MLB player tests positive, they cancel the games or push them back. That's not the case in MMA. You lose a couple of fights because some people tested positive for COVID. You still have an event. You still have something to broadcast. So it makes sense that Oko Sports is making this deal with Bellator, because they're getting back in the full swing of it, especially if they announce, that they're going to do the CBS or Showtime deal tomorrow. That, means they're probably going to start picking up the pace in terms of cards. It's not going to be, a card here, card there. My guess is Bellator will have more cards than they did when they were with Paramount. So that really helps out Oko Sports. If you've got somebody consistently delivering content and things are pretty much running as close to normal as possible, given the circumstances. PFL side is a little bit different. Obviously, they've canceled this season, but they're looking at doing 2021. They're talking about doing a bubble, and it seems that they are dead set on doing that, regardless of where the pandemic is at. They're going to do a bubble similar to what the NBA has done, which has proven very effective in COVID, against COVID-19. You haven't had anyone test positive there. If a player's left that bubble, they've either been forced to quarantine or been sent home. And so far, you have not seen the issues that the MLB has faced, and most likely what the NFL will face. We'll see. This is week one, obviously, but we've heard about, people in training camp, whether it's Ezekiel Elliott catching it or several people on a particular team catching it. They haven't been outspoken about COVID outbreaks, but it's definitely been happening. So with a bubble, they're going to be insulated. They're probably going to run as normal throughout that entire 2021 season. And again, with Eurosport India, that's if you're looking for content, especially right now when you can't guarantee some of sports, like who knows what soccer is going to look like in terms of fans. And if again, players catch it, they could end up canceling games, postponing games. Looks like PFL is going to be consistently there in 2021. So that's probably why they're getting these deals done. And again, for the promotion itself, Bellator and PFL have leverage, right? They can say, yeah, we're going to put on events consistently. You're not going to have a game postponed the last minute because a couple players test positive a couple days before. It's not going to happen. They're going to scrap those fights if that happens. PFL, I'm sure, will have a list of alternates lined up just in case, just similar to how they have, in their tournament format, somebody gets injured, either in the regular season or the playoffs, they have alternates in place ready to step in. They're going to have those lined up for sure. And especially if they're looking to bring in some, Indian fighters, that could get kind of a fan base in a emerging market that is hungry for sports, I'm sure. They are growing at a rapid pace. It's an emerging market from several industries. Sports is no different. You had WWE make a big move over there over the past several years, where Jinder Mahal became the champion, really trying to get their foothold in that Indian consumer market. It's a good call. And PFL has the leverage to say, yeah, no, give us a pretty good deal on this. We'll build up some local stars. We'll throw them in to the tournament. Can't say tournament today. Tournament format, and we'll give them good exposure. We'll give them, hometown hero status. Let's roll with this, and it's a good deal all around. So smart move by both promotions. Don't know the specifics of either deal in terms of, what the money looks like right now. I'm sure those will eventually come out, but good call for both promotions, especially given the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's never a bad idea to leverage your ability to put on consistent events to renegotiate or get new media rights broadcast deals. And that's what both Bellator and PFL have done. So good play by both of them, and we'll see what happens. We'll see if it works out for them. Last thing I want to touch on for this episode is the COVID-19 derailments of UFC cards. Not just the UFC. You had BKFC have Phil Baroni get pulled. I mean, it's affecting everybody, but UFC in particular, and what's going on there. So last week we had 7 fights, just a main card, no prelims. That hasn't happened since 2005, maybe 2006. I'm pretty sure 2005. Either way, nearly 15 years ago, which is bonkers. To not have prelims, to have 7 fights is insane. And because of last-minute COVID-19 positives, which is not great, because those fighters were obviously interacting with other people in the fighter hotels. They were, doing the weigh-ins. They fist bumped Dana White or shaking Dana White's hand in some cases. Not great. Not great that they later, turned up positive. Now, this was inevitable when you were putting fights on in the pandemic, right? We didn't see it as much when the UFC first started, but now we're getting a lot of positive test cases. I think a big reason for that is just virus fatigue. Let's not go down the road of political, leanings or whether you should wear a mask or not. There's plenty of research on there. People are going to have their own opinions. I don't want to address all that, but no matter where you are at in all of that, and where you lean and what your beliefs are, everyone is feeling this virus fatigue, right? Things are not back to normal. Things are not pre-COVID-19. There is no vaccine. If you've been super diligent, staying in your house, except for going out absolutely when you need to, you've got to be feeling it at this point, just in terms of, not being able to go visit people and do your normal, regular routine, being cooped up, feeling cabin fever. Any way you cut it, the world is kind of in this virus fatigue right now. And things are opening up more, especially as cases have gone down in the United States. Things are starting to open up more. And when that happens, there's an inevitable uptick in cases. There's inevitably people who are spreading it without knowing, from person to person. It's going to happen. And so being in Vegas, right, where casinos are open, although they are at limited capacity and all that, you still got people moving around, doing all that stuff. If a fighter is staying at one of the many Vegas hotels on the Strip, or even outside the Strip, but a nicer hotel, which the UFC generally puts people up in solid hotels. We're not talking like La Quinta in the middle of nowhere that's 45 minutes from the venue. Generally around, the Apex, I'm sure, is where they're hanging out. But they're not under strict protocols. They're really not. And that, I think, is the biggest thing that we've seen from the fights falling out at Abu Dhabi on Fight Island, where you had extremely strict protocols in place. I mean, they made sure you didn't come out of your room. You were quarantined between every test. They had a bubble. You were not allowed to leave. It was strict. I mean, very strict. versus people kind of being left to their own devices, where some fighters will take every precaution in the world and probably be all right, not, test positive. Others will end up just being in the wrong place, the wrong time at a hotel where maybe a worker has it or another guest has it and they don't realize it. And you're kind of left, well, crap, now I've tested positive and what am I supposed to do? And with that, I think that as bad as it has been, where we've seen now arguably the worst. I know, I'm not even going to say arguably. I'm going to say the worst scenario the UFC has seen so far through COVID, with last week's event where they were down to 7 fights. I think that once they go back to Fight Island, because of the strict protocols I mentioned, because those are still going to be in place in Abu Dhabi, they are not messing around with this. They are saying, nope, guess what? Bubble, no fans, same protocols as before. I think when we go back to Fight Island, those COVID-19 cancellations go away. Yes, you may have 1 or 2 fighters end up testing positive where they, caught it on the plane ride, or, actually, I wouldn't even say probably not even the plane ride, probably beforehand, and they just either haven't tested positive yet or don't have symptoms yet. Virus obviously takes a while to incubate. They're still working on that. It's a novel new thing. Science isn't completely exact with incubation periods and things like that. People are reacting different too. There's a 14-day window where you can be completely fine, and then on day 14 you can start showing symptoms. I mean, so you may have 1 or 2 fighters end up testing positive there from before they were in the bubble. But once they get there, you're not going to have these fight day cancellations of, somebody tested positive, or 3 or 4 fights dropping out. They're probably going to weed those out pretty quickly, especially with the amount of tests they were doing and the way they were quarantining everyone. That's not going away. They're not changing that protocol. So my guess is maybe 1, at most 2 dropouts due to COVID-19 once they go back to Fight Island. And then we'll get back into a normal rhythm where you're not seeing these crazy last minute cancellations and switching, of fights and all of that. Now, will there still be the weight cutting issues and things that we've come to see in MMA where, the fights end up getting canceled because somebody can't cut weight or has an issue cutting weight, or or gets an injury last minute? Sure, that stuff's gonna happen, but you're not going to see the same COVID-19 effect once we move back to Abu Dhabi. It's just, they are taking it far too strict over there, that the likelihood that somebody accidentally catches it, it's not going to happen. So our woes are, possibly going to continue. Obviously, Frank Camacho is out from a COVID-19 positive test. I think he's the only one so far this week that's been pulled, a couple days before the event. And they do have a replacement. Jalen Turner is now going to fight Brock Weaver instead of Frank. We may see another fight or 2 drop out last minute. I could see that. Covington Woodley fight, I think the same thing is possible. But once we move to UFC 253 and beyond for the 5 or I believe 6 week stint where they're back in Abu Dhabi, it's not going to be the same effect. We're going to get some normal fights that are scheduled. I mean, hopefully 254. I don't think 254 is going to be plagued by COVID. Again, I won't tempt the MMA gods here by saying, oh, no injuries will happen, we'll keep it all intact. Not going to do that, but it's not going to face those COVID-19 problems. So 2 more weeks, or really at this point, 10 days. I think 10 days is what we're looking at, where we just got to get through 10 more days of last minute switcheroos and people dropping out. But after that, then we should finally get back to some normal expectations in terms of this is who's on the fight card and this is who's actually fighting. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, for watching this episode. Really appreciate you watching this. And I promise I am working on guests. I am sad that the guests I've been working on for a little bit now was not able to get on this week. I'm really hoping we get them on next week. I don't want to spoil who it is. It should be an incredible interview. But, we are working on that, and I'm hoping next week is going to be our lucky number, and we're going to get that done. But I do appreciate you listening, as always. Thank you so much. Appreciate the support. If you have any questions, hit me up at AllDayAuger on Twitter. It's ALLDAYAUGER, spelled like Auger. Name's Auger. If you watch this, you know this by now. If you haven't and you're new, thank you so much, and now you know. But again, hit me up with feedback and anything that you want me to cover, I will cover. If you say, hey, as long as it's business related and not something crazy, but if it has just a twinge of business, I will cover it. So hit me up, drop any comments in here or feedback that you have. Again, really appreciate it, and keep on keeping on.